Hello and welcome to day 2 of the TCO20 finals. Day 2, encompasses the marathon finals. We're going to be talking about that for the next hour. Your hosts for the marathon match are Dimitri and Aaron, also known as Dimkadimon and Aaron Kaasan. If you don't know much about Dimitri, he's been a member since 2002. He was an algo competitor for a while and made the switch over to marathon within his career here at Topcoder. He also wrote the problem for this year's TCO20 marathon match finals. So you're going to be able to hear all this straight from the source. Also, we have Aaron, as I mentioned before. Aaron used to work with us here at Topcoder, veteran marathon problem coordinator and writer. And she also coined the name marathon back in 2007. Pretty interesting facts there. All right. Some things to look forward to in this marathon match finals this year. So Tourist has won the past 2 TCOs. In one of those years, he won the marathon finals and the algorithm finals. That was in a crazy year for him. We'll see if he can repeat that this year, as he is competing in both the algorithm and marathon finals. And we have Saiho back this year. He actually stopped competing back when Tourists started winning. So we're going to see if either the person that hasn't been here in a while but has the experience can succeed, or maybe the person who has been competing most recently will have an advantage. But, we also have a lot of fierce competitors here that have been through this multiple times. And I'm sure you can hear my dog walking around. This is the kind of stuff that you get during a live show. All right, without any further ado, I am going to turn this over to Aaron and Dimitri. Take it away, folks.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here, as always. It's a shame we're not all in person this year. Of course, we've got some stuff going on in the world with various viruses going around, making things a little bit more complicated, but we're doing the best we can. We're talking, of course, about the marathon match today. For a brief introduction, for anybody that's not familiar, the marathon competition is an algorithm-style competition. However, unlike our algorithm matches themselves, this is not about solving problems where there's a single right output that you have to get. This is about a problem where you're trying to find the most optimal solution you can, and you have the opportunity not only to kind of come up with your code and make your submission, but to resubmit and keep making better submissions throughout the course of the competition. And it runs over a long period of time. Of course, for the TCO finals, long period of time, in this case, means 24 hours. When it's been typical on-site matches, it's been 8 to 12 hours, depending on exactly the format we follow. This year, however, it is a 24-hour round. That's going to do 2 different things. It's going to give competitors potentially a little bit longer to work on the problem. It's also going to cater to different time zones around the world, since not everybody is in the same place right now. So some competitors may choose to work at the times that they're most awake and most able to concentrate on the problem, or they may instead just choose to work straight through for the 24 hours. For anybody that's been following Topcoder or has been a competitor for a while, you might remember, I believe it was back in 2010, during the TCO finals in Las Vegas, we actually did an on-site 24-hour round. It was actually kind of an interesting event. We had some food catered in around midnight, some sandwiches and soft drinks and stuff. And some of these competitors really looked in pretty rough shape by the next morning by the time they finished. However, more than half of them did make it the full 24 hours through the event. At the time, however, given the on-site format only lasting a few days, we got pretty universal feedback that for an on-site event, it didn't really work that well because everybody was just simply sleeping the following day and kind of missed everything. However, now that we have sort of the remote TCO finals and the virtual finals going on, the 24-hour format is once again in play, and we're going to see how that works for this year. I'm certainly excited to see what happens. Any thoughts you'd like to add?
Yeah, definitely. It's really exciting. I mean, this year we have 2 people who've won multiple times before. So we've got Saiho, who's won it 6 times, and Tourist, who's just won it 2 times. And Saiho's coming in from a long break. He was in the industry for 2 years, so he hasn't competed a lot. But he's came back and he's won a lot of he's won a couple of competitions and he's made it to the final. So, I think it's really anyone's game between those two. And plus, we've got a lot of other really strong competitors who've been doing really well lately. So, yeah, it's really anyone's game. And I think also this year it's very different that the final is running online. I mean, um, if you have a good setup at home and you're comfortable sitting there, it's actually probably better for you to be at home because you're in your own world and you kind of do what you want, how you're comfortable. And there's probably less pressure because there's no sort of people walking around in the background staring at you, and you kind of just do what you want. However, we're still watching them online because we have to make sure that they're following all the rules, so they're not cheating. I mean, obviously they're not going to cheat, we know that, but just in case, we have to make sure that nothing dodgy happens in the background. So they have to they can use the internet, but they have to share their screen and they have to share their music, I believe, or their sound, so we know if in case they're talking to someone. So things like that.
I often wonder about how much cheating is really an issue in these events, and this is kind of has been a back and forth discussion that we've had over the years. And anybody who's been around for a very long time probably knows that over time we have sort of backed off on what were once some very, very harsh restrictions. The reality being that for the most part, who are they going to use to help them cheat? These are the best of the best already right here.
Exactly.
So
They're
it's not.
already the best of the best, so there's not many people who can really help them other than themselves, right? Like, even though I wrote the problem, I still couldn't help them because I don't know how to solve it well. So
That's
I'm
actually
not.
interesting about marathons is that you don't necessarily have to be very, very good at doing them. You have to have an understanding of different algorithms, of different approaches, an understanding of problem complexities and problem space. But you don't necessarily have to be great at them in order to write a very compelling problem and an interesting problem. And obviously, we can probably get more on that a little bit later in our discussion about the actual process of writing problems and how you came up with this one. One
Yep,
thing I
sure.
think that Nick did say kind of at the top of this is that Saiho kind of left a few years back. A lot of people may have wondered why he left. And in fact, I had wondered the same thing. The best I actually got from him in a short discussion was basically that he had other interests in life, and he knew that eventually, sooner or later, he'd be doing his last marathon and wouldn't be doing it anymore. So there was just one year he was like, you know what? Why don't I just call it quits now? I just won. I think that's enough for now. And simply because it was as good a time as any to stop. Whether or not that's actually true, whether or not increasing competition may have had something to do with it, I mean, certainly we could speculate on all these things, and I suspect there's probably any number of factors we may not know that were happening behind the scenes, either personally or professionally. At any rate, I think I'm definitely excited to say that I'm glad Saiho is back.
I'm very glad that he's back, and it's going to be one of our strongest competitions this year for sure.
Oh,
There's
for
a lot
sure.
of really good competitors. I
Yeah,
kept inviting him back, and he didn't want to come back. But then maybe once he saw Tourist winning, he thought to himself, "Well, I better show this Tourist guy, who's the boss. I have to compete again."
yeah. Something that I should mention for anybody watching this stream, if anybody wants to follow along and kind of see the ongoing leaderboard as the competition is progressing, the TCO20 homepage does have that information listed. And you can sort of see a brief description of the problem statement as well as the current scores for all the different competitors. And in fact, we do have a couple of people who've already made their first few submissions, so that's kind of good to see.
Okay, let's talk about the competitors in this
Sure.
year's final.
So obviously the first two that come to mind are, as we've already sort of mentioned them a little bit, we can talk about them a little bit more right now, are Saiho and Tourist. Saiho being one of the winningest marathon competitors we've had ever, has been away for a few years but is back this year. And then of course we've also got Tourist, who won the last 2 years and in fact last year won both the marathon and the algo. So the question is this perhaps the new unstoppable competitor?
That's
And of
right.
course,
It's never been done before.
Yeah, and well, first time for everything, I guess. Now the question is, can he do it again this year? Um, if you're somebody who likes to take bets on these kind of things, not that we recommend that, but if Las Vegas were making odds on these folks, you would probably assume it's going to be either Saiho or Tourist, but you never really know because on the right day with the right problem, the right circumstances, really any one of these 12 competitors could be the winner. I'm looking at the list of competitors now. Blackmeth, Catalan T, Diver 19, Milanin, Nika, Sullyper, Tomarun, and Vladimir Leite are all people who've been here many times. Some have done quite well, in fact.
Yeah, well, let's talk about W Light. I think he's been around for quite some time, and he's competed in 11 TCOs, but he's never won it. His best result was third, and personally, I'm going for this guy because he really deserves to win, and he's just such a nice guy as well. So
I was about to say the
it'd be
same
great
thing.
to see.
He's really a very likable guy. I've had the pleasure of
Indeed.
spending some time with him many years at TCO. In fact, pretty much every TCO I've been to, he's been there. And yeah, in terms of somebody who really deserves to win and really kind of embodies the spirit of TCO, he's definitely one of the stronger competitors in that regard. A few times I've even asked him, "Is this going to be the year that you finally win it?" And yeah, maybe I shouldn't ask him that. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm jinxing him. He certainly though is here. He's having a lot of fun, and he's still giving it his all every time. He was, in fact, this time around, he was the first one to make a submission on the problem today. So, yeah, perhaps he's still excited, and that energy hasn't worn off yet, and that's good to see.
V-Dave is a really interesting one because I believe he's been competing for a long time. He actually did Marathon Match 1, and it's his first TCO finals, so huge congratulations to him. He's been trying really hard to get into the final, and he's finally done it. So, yeah, well done. Very, very impressive perseverance.
Yeah, we actually have a few different fun facts about some of our competitors. A lot of these competitors have done different things and kind of made their way to the TCO finals in different ways. For anybody not aware, there are multiple stages of online competition throughout the year leading up to this, and in each of the individual stages, the top several folks with the most points from the competitions that we run during that time are the ones who do get invited. I almost said on site, but invited to the finals. So it's interesting to see that some folks just come in and do really well on one or two contests. Some folks do really well all year round. It kind of depends on whether you're more of a maybe a more casual competitor who's just always competing, or maybe somebody who's sort of the competitor on a mission, comes in just knows how many they have to win to get here and punches their ticket, and then we see them here. That's more of a Saiho kind of approach. Do exactly as much as you have to do to win, and then worry about the rest later.
Well, speaking of which, I've noticed that Tourist lately has been competing only on the last day of a marathon match, or the last 2 days. So I'm wondering whether he's actually sort of preparing for the finals format where you only get 10, 24 hours, and he's trying to do his best in that one day. And in fact, he's lost rating so much that he's actually a yellow, which is quite unusual for someone who's won twice before.
That is a good point, yeah. Looking at just kind of the ratings and stuff like this, folks familiar with the ratings from Algo know that there's a whole lot of people who are red. In the marathon side, there are a lot less red-rated folks, and yellows are a little bit more common to do, relatively well in a lot of the contests. That's simply because the number of people competing in any given contest and the frequency of contests tends to be a little bit lower, so there's simply just not as much opportunity for ratings to go up quite as high.
That's right.
Nonetheless, though, seeing somebody that kind of dropped down to yellow but still fighting strong is always good to see.
Saliper, Benjamin Button, is also a really nice guy whom I met last year in Houston. We've been communicating with each other on email, and yeah, he's really cool. And he's only joined recently, but he's already got 19 competitions under his belt, and he's been doing really well. And he just he just loves the competition. So he's always very keen to, talk about extra extensions to the problem and answer all my questions. So yeah, good on him. It's good to see him.
So it's funny you mentioned kind of talking with competitors after the fact and extra extensions to the problem. Something that we get asked a lot is how can I improve in marathon matches and what kind of stuff should I study? And really, one of the best answers is to actually look at the old matches and some of the discussion that takes place afterwards. A lot of competitors, by the time they're done with these week-long matches, have spent quite a long time really thinking through the problems and thinking deep about them. Sometimes, like you say, kind of do think about things they would do that they would do a little bit differently, or maybe things that could make the problem more interesting, if that's even possible a lot of times. But yeah, that's really the best way to learn these things, is to kind of look at what other people have done and look at what they've found, see what approaches they've talked about that they really like, because you will see some common themes there. And most of these competitors, as much as they might be a little bit shy at first, or you might be a little bit nervous, many of them are actually quite approachable and really are fun to talk to and can really kind of teach you a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. The best way to learn is to practice and to learn from the best. So if you ask these top guys how do they do it, they will willingly tell you, because there's no real secrets. Everyone wants to share their approach, or most of their approaches, and yeah, they all just really easygoing, great guys, and who just love to hang out.
I do want to add a shameless plug for the Spectator contest that we also have going on. That's the snake charmer problem. There's sort of a chance for folks who want to learn more about marathons or try one out for the first time. If they actually download the problems visualizer, give it a try, and just try running something locally, take a picture, get a screenshot, send it to harshit@topcoder.com, and you can be entered in for one of the first 50 members, if you've never submitted a marathon before, a chance to win a t-shirt. And we know how much everybody loves Top Coder t-shirts. Now's your chance to get one. So do take part in the Spectator contest if it's something that might be of any interest to you at all.
Yeah, definitely a great idea. So try out the snake charmer problem. It's really easy to get into. And we actually did a webinar that had that problem. So I explained how you can get started and some basic strategies that you can use. You can download, the code from the original competition, and you can read how people approach the problem. So that's really a good way to get started.
Since I'm doing shameless plugs, not entirely related to marathon, I'm going to do one for algorithm also. We have our very first beginner SRM is going to be next Wednesday. Do check the calendar for your local time zone. But yeah, next Wednesday is going to be our first attempt at doing a beginner SRM, where folks who are low rated or have not participated in many competitions yet can have a chance to do some easier problems and potentially maybe bump up their rating a few points. That'll be something a little bit different, something we're trying out, and we hope that everybody enjoys that.
Okay, let's talk about the problem now, because that's what we're all here for. Okay, so everyone loves pizza, right? I definitely love eating pizza. So this is why this year we decided to write a problem about how to make the best pizza. So you're given the pizza base. So that's a fixed circular object, and you've already cut up all the ingredients for the base of different shapes and sizes. And the shapes that you have are circles. So these can be like salami, tomatoes, onion, olives, and the other shape is rectangles. So they're like slices of pineapple or capsicum, and they all come in different sizes as well. So your task is to actually take all your ingredients, or some of them, and place them on the pizza base in a way that they don't overlap each other, and they don't they don't sit outside the boundary of the base, and they cover as much area as possible. Now, the other thing is we've introduced a special constraint. So there's an X parameter, and the X parameter controls sort of the balance between the two different shape types. So when X is low, you actually want to use more circles because circles become more valuable. And if X is high, you want to use more rectangles. And if X is somewhere in the middle, like a 0.5, you actually want to have a balance of the two shapes. So you want to have both the circles and the rectangles. Now, so just looking at it, naively, this is quite a common problem that you might have seen before. It's called the packing problem. But there are some special twists in this particular problem. So in particular, there's two shape types, so the rectangle and the circle. So you really have to use different ways to check for overlap. So there's three types of overlap. You can have a circle with a circle rectangle, or a rectangle with a rectangle. So so there's a bit more work involved, but the competitors can actually use the code that we already provide them in the tester. So that shouldn't be too hard. Now, the other difference is we're using integer coordinates. So normally these problems use real valued coordinates. So you can actually, you could, for example, put 3 circles in a way that they all touch each other. So it's a really tight fit. With integer coordinates, you can't do that as easily, but it does allow you to do other things, which I'll talk about later. And we believe that the overall complexity of the problem is still hard. So it's still tricky to find a good packing with integer coordinates. Now, the other thing is, in previous similar problems, you had to place all the shapes, and you kind of had to minimize the overall area that they fit into, so the boundary area. Here, the boundary is actually fixed, and you might not have to fit all the shapes. Maybe you can only fit some of the shapes, but you have to maximize the area that they cover. So so there are some slight differences there. What else? I think I've covered everything. Oh, the X constraint. Yep. So I've mentioned that before. So you might want to, you might have to write special methods for fitting circles versus rectangles, and then maybe another method for kind of combining the two. Okay, so let's talk about some of the.
So before you get into that, we do actually have a question that came in.
Oh,
Which
yes.
we could probably try to field since it came in. The question is, why did W Late have a perfect 100 points and now has a lower amount? And I'm assuming the answer here is relative scoring. Do we want to talk about how that plays into this?
Yes, that's a good idea. Let's talk about relative scoring.
So I'll go ahead and try to explain that. The
Go
idea
ahead.
is that for each different test case, each competitor is given a score for how they do for that test case. However, some test cases it might be possible to score much higher, or maybe very hard to score higher than a certain amount. So different tests may be harder or easier than others. Each individual score per test case is converted into a relative score based upon how you do compared to everybody else. Whoever is doing the best on a given test case gets full marks for that test, and everybody else is scaled based upon that. So whoever was the first person to submit, in this case it was W. Late, was the first submitter. He had a perfect score of 100, meaning that he had the best score on each of the tests. As soon as others started submitting, then who has the best score on each test is subject to change. And it may not necessarily be the same person with the best score on every test. It might be that W. Late is winning on 3 of the tests and somebody else is winning on 5 of the tests, and so on. Or it could be that one person is in fact winning all of them. That would be a perfect score of 100. So anytime anybody makes a submission, it will affect everybody's score in the leaderboard potentially, depending on how it affects the best score per test case, if you will.
Yeah, that's correct. And that actually makes the competition quite exciting because, you can submit a solution and make everyone else go down. So that's kind of interesting. So should we talk about some of the strategies for
I
this
think that's
particular
a great
problem?
idea. I know you had a few strategies in mind, kind of going into this. That's always when you're writing a problem. It's always good to know a few of the possible approaches people might take.
Mm.
What were some of the ones you were thinking about?
Yeah, okay. So some of the basic strategies I'm thinking is, so you could have just a random solution. So pick a shape randomly and try to place it on the base somewhere where you can, again randomly. Then pick another shape and try to place that one again. If you can't place it, then you skip it and you go to the next shape. But this is all done randomly, and at the end of that, you get a final solution. And what you can do is you can um, rerun the whole procedure, get a new solution, and maybe if it's better, you keep the new solution. And you keep doing that until your time runs out and you get some kind of a score at the end of that, which is a selection of all your best solutions. Okay, so that's pretty simple, but let's try something a bit more complicated. The other approach I was thinking was a greedy approach. So basically, each shape has a particular value associated to it. So in this problem, we value shapes that have a large area, and depending on the x constraint, we value shapes. So for low x's, we value circles, and for high x's, we value rectangles. So what you can do is you can compute a value for each shape, and then sort all the shapes from highest to lowest value, and then go through that list and pick the top shape, put that in, so that will give you sort of the maximum score you could get with one move. Then go down the list, pick the next highest scoring shape, put that in if you can, and keep doing it that way. So that will give you a greedy score, and I believe that score should be quite good, hopefully better than the random solution I proposed earlier.
The funny thing is, while we say that kind of that greedy score might be quite good, in the reality, by the time we get maybe two-thirds of the way through this competition, probably all, if not most, of these competitors will have a solution that's at least that good, and what they're really going to be fighting for is kind of those last few points between a good solution and a great solution, and that can actually make a huge difference in the leaderboard by that point in the contest.
Yep, absolutely.
So have you thought a bit about how they might improve upon that without obviously giving away anything too damaging that's gonna spoil the problem at this point?
Yeah, well, I think an obvious strategy that everyone knows about is hill climbing and simulated annealing. So basically, you start with a random solution. So shapes are placed randomly, and then you can apply moves to that solution to try to shift it slightly. So one move could be pick a shape and move it to an empty space on the base. Another move could be to pick two shapes and swap them around. And you could also remove a shape and replace it with a different shape. And you sort of keep making these moves, and you accept a move if it increases your score, and otherwise you reject the move. And you keep doing this until you get a good solution.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's actually kind of a solution strategy that comes up in a lot of these problems, I suppose.
Mm. I have some other ideas, but I don't know. Am I allowed to talk about them?
In theory, I believe we have told competitors that they're not allowed to watch any of the live streams while they're competing,
Okay.
because we do make clear that we might talk a bit about the problems and stuff. So in my opinion, in this case, since we're not actually on site, this is one advantage we have by being remote for TCO this year, is that nobody can accidentally overhear what we're talking about. So I would
Mm.
say let's go ahead and let's discuss some of the things that you had thought about, perhaps.
Yeah, let's. Okay, yeah. Let's do that. Okay, so another solution I was thinking is more like a physical system. So these shapes, imagine that they have a random velocity, and so they move in a random direction with a random speed, and they kind of, as they move, they bounce around, they bounce off each other, and so the direction changes after the bounce, and there's also an overlapping base around them, so they can't go beyond the base, so they bounce off the base. And as you shrink that base, they will kind of, bounce around like, molecules in a air molecules in a container, and they will naturally find a good packing, a good fit.
That's actually
And,
really interesting. I like
and
that.
you can repeat it, right? So that's one idea, and some obvious ideas involving optimization. So, for example, you can treat circles as squares. I mean, obviously, you're going to miss out the corners, but that probably doesn't really matter. What you gain from that is the overlap computation becomes a lot easier, because you only have to compute overlap between rectangles and rectangles. So that makes your whole approach faster, which is good. You can also treat the whole base as a 200 by 200 grid, and when you place a new shape on this grid, you kind of paint in the cells that it covers, okay? And then when you're trying to place a new shape in, all you have to do is check those cells where you want to place it, and if one of those cells has already been painted, if it's already taken, that means there's going to be overlap, so you can't place that shape there.
Pretty simple.
So that should speed up your overlap computations.
Yeah,
and the reason we can do that is because we have integer coordinates. So I think that's kind of useful. This is an idea that Jacko, one of the testers, came up. Okay, another idea is...
Yeah, okay, so I'm finding out that actually it is possible they may see the recording, so we might hold off on going any deeper than that.
Okay, yep, let's not let's
hold off on going too far. I will say for our viewers at home, we were kind of flipping through and seeing some of the competitors and seeing some of the competitors' screens as we were having some of our discussions, and in fact, I believe we are going to be seeing a few more of those. It might look kind of Greek to anybody that's not familiar with actually competing in different competitions. The idea, though, is this is actually what you would be seeing on site if you were looking at those kiosks we usually have set up that mirror the competitors' screens. And in some cases, taking a peek at some of the competitor webcams is a nice way to sort of see and watch people just really concentrate. At this phase of the competition, anyway. Later in the competition, we get to see people be very frustrated and sometimes like really, really frustrated with themselves, just trying to figure out what to do next. Or perhaps we'll also see people really tired too. That can be kind of entertaining as a spectator, just to watch competitors go through the whole motions of just going from excited to start on the problem, really think hard about it, and you can almost see in their face sometimes when they make a big breakthrough or have a great idea that they want to try. You see you go from this kind of this frustration to this like almost like waking up, and you see them start typing feverishly on their keyboard. I'm sure we'll have a chance to do that at some point. Seeing that we have Black Math was on our screen for a second there, and you can almost see just the way his mouth moves. you kind of see what he's thinking as he's doing this. I'm really having a good time with it, to be honest.
Yeah, I feel like we're spying on them in their own
We
home.
are. We absolutely are.
I was just watching Black Math's screen, and he had an article about pi, how to compute pi.
Interesting.
So you'll definitely need this for this problem for circles.
You have to wonder how many different problems that have already been worked on. But like you said, it's not exactly the same as existing packing problems. It's not exactly the same as a two-dimensional knapsack. There's things that make it just a little bit different, the variety of shapes and that kind of thing. You still wonder if problems that have been solved already that are sort of, or, well, maybe I shouldn't say problems that have been solved, but problems that have been very well studied anyway. You kind of look at some of what's out there and think, well, what components of this might be relevant for the problem at hand here? And certainly some of them probably are. some but not all. That's what makes this actually kind of really exciting, is to be able to kind of put some of those pieces together and figure out what matters here and what doesn't. Try to kind of use the best of what you can find from each of those.
Yeah, I mean, it is a common problem, but as I've mentioned, there are some twists in this one. And geometry is a tricky thing to code because there's a lot of special cases you need to handle. But hopefully with these integer coordinates, you don't have to use the epsilon check too much as you do for floating point calculations. So hopefully that will make the problem a bit easier.
Certainly helps with the tester implementation for the stuff that they want to do locally. I'll even, this much I think I can probably say is, in the process of testing this, certainly the question of what epsilon to use and how to use it was something that came up a lot in the discussions. And in fact, on any top coder problem, whenever we're talking about floating point values, avoiding problems with overlap and equality when you're dealing with floating point values can be a real bear to solve. And so it's the integer coordinates do take care of a lot of that, but as you say, it still leaves more than enough problem space to explore. That kind of dovetails into something I want to talk about a little bit also, kind of the how complex of a problem do we want to have for a one-day event. TCO finals, it's always challenging to try to come up with something that's interesting and engaging, that's going to keep people interested who are very, very smart, keep them interested long enough to make the competition exciting, yet also be easily approachable enough that they can get something going pretty quickly. Because when you have a 24-hour contest, you don't want a situation where they're going to have to spend the first 12 hours of that just writing local tools to test the problem. You want to be able to really dive right in within the first hour to at least have something to start working with.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you want the problem to be engaging enough, but not too difficult, because this is only a 24-hour competition, whereas normally they get 7 days to work on it and come up with different ideas. So it is a relatively short competition, but at the same time, you don't want it to be too simple, because if it's too simple, then everyone will solve it well and you won't be able to differentiate between the competitors. So there has to be a problem that allows you multiple different approaches and different scores at the end to separate the people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've always found that even problems that I myself think might be kind of simple oftentimes have a lot more depth and a lot more subtlety to them than perhaps I realized at first. I think perhaps the pressure of competing in the finals may add to that too, where as much as you're ready to go and ready to solve the problem, there's so much on the line that you start really having to think about all the little intricate details of everything. I know, speaking with competitors, they've always surprised me in that even things that I thought were simple and I was worried were too simple, turns out are not really as simple as I thought. And even by the end of it, there was still enough spread in the scores. I don't think we're going to be disappointed this time in my understanding of the problem and how to solve it. I'm seeing some visualizations come up, and that's actually kind of really cool to see.
That looked like a good solution. So you can see all those circles are quite tight next to each other, which is what you want.
Is it the best solution for that test case? Probably not.
Probably not.
Even though
you
it's
might
good,
not be able.
Be better.
Yeah, you might not be able to find the best solution, like the optimal solution, unless it's a really small case.
So another question we actually have coming in on our chat that I see is, do you think any member would have an advantage because of 24 hours this time rather than 10 hours? I think that's kind of a loaded question. Could go either way, personally, but I'm interested to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think some people who are competing today have already done 24-hour competitions, so they'd be used to it. I'm thinking, Saiho comes to my mind. I'm pretty sure he's done that kind of competition before, and he just doesn't sleep very much. He can just keep on going. I don't know how he does it. In fact, he said he's going to sleep the first few hours, but we're watching him. We're watching him now, and he's not sleeping. I suspect a lot of these guys probably won't sleep at all because they're just so competitive and they want to do their best. So yeah, they want to win. And if you sleep, that really puts you at a disadvantage. I mean, you wake up and everyone's already ahead of you. So it's a game of catch up, which is
One thing I wonder if we might see happen this time that maybe never has happened at any TCO on-site event before. I don't know if you're familiar with the phrase fridge logic or shower logic, where you kind
I'm
of
not
go and
not
okay,
familiar with
so
that.
you're sitting at your computer for a while, you're working on something for several hours, you get up, you go to your refrigerator because you want to grab a snack or you want to grab, a drink or whatever. By the
Mm,
time you get there, you totally forget what it is you were grabbing out of your refrigerator, but you all of a sudden, while you're not even thinking about it anymore, get a great idea for what it was you were working on. There's
right, right.
gonna be
So
some
if you
opportunity for that, I think.
Yeah, so if you walk around and do some menial tasks, sometimes you get a breakthrough in the task that you really care about.
Yeah, sometimes the shower is a great place for that too. I've found you don't realize it,
Yeah,
but you all of a sudden come up with something.
yeah. I normally get good ideas in the shower, or I take a walk just around
Yeah,
the house, and
that makes
that
sense.
seems to help. Kind of distracts you, and
Yeah, so it's
good way
funny
to
when
think.
you mentioned being around the house. Something that had come up earlier, and I meant to respond then. I'll offer my thoughts now. Kind of the notion of, well, being at home, most of these people, maybe do they have a good setup at home? Do they have
Mm,
a nice work area? I'm going to take a guess. I'm going to take a guess that every one of these competitors has a very nice setup and a very nice workspace at home for this, or at least someplace that they're very comfortable. And
mm,
they're working on their own machine. They're working at the desk that they usually work at, and it's in fact the same workspace that they'd be using during the year during the online portion of the competition. So in some ways, what we're seeing at the finals this year is a very true representation of how these folks compete during the
mm.
year, and not just sort of a fake on-site version of themselves.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good point. So this is like the real deal because they're they're sitting in their natural environment. This is how they normally
Exactly.
compete. I I guess the only oh, that's a wow, that's a pretty visualizer. He's colored them in differently. I guess the only difference here is they have access to VMs. So some of
Okay.
the competitors have opted to get some extra machines for testing. Um, maybe
So
maybe we should talk about
yeah,
testing.
definitely. Yeah, one of the
Yeah.
things that just from having seen them do it myself, these competitors, although there's kind of the example cases that they can get detailed feedback for in our system, and when they do a submission, there are, I believe, 50 cases that are being run against it to generate their kind of overall score. Most of these competitors are testing locally as well on any number
Mm,
of randomly generated cases, probably hundreds, if not thousands, of cases every time they make a change to try to judge for themselves if the solution really is better.
mm.
That's one of the places where having that VM, especially a very, very powerful VM that can run can just crank through a lot of code very quickly, can be helpful. That way, every time you recompile your code, you could be running a suite of 10,000 tests potentially, just trying to test and see, or even just constantly testing to see if your solutions are getting better or worse than what you had before. Some of these competitors even have their own little utilities that they use to generate spreadsheets and tell themselves
Yeah.
whether they're doing better or whether they're doing worse. I'm finding from the chat from some of our helpful researchers here that 7 of the competitors actually opted for the VM. So that is just over half of the competitors are using the VM to give them just some additional computing power to help sort of do this testing.
Yeah, and I think testing is also very important in these competitions because you can kind of brute force the parameters and find the best combination of parameters. And you can run a lot of tests as well. But the key difference in this year's competition is we're using 50 provisional tests because normally we have 100 provisional tests. And the reason we've done that is this way they get a faster feedback from their
Yep.
submission. So with the faster feedback, they can, concentrate on actually solving the problem and yeah, kind of get on with it. However, one downside with 50 provisional tests is the score they get at the end is somewhat unreliable. You could say it has a high variance. So that actually means that what you see on the leaderboard may not be the final score at the end of the competition when we do the final tests, and the rankings could change as well.
Yep,
So
that's very true.
this is why local testing would be really important. And
We're seeing some fantastic live footage right now that I
I'm
think is
just
worth
watching
commenting on.
tourist walking around his.
So
Yeah, so
how can he set up his camera so we can watch him pace back and forth as he thinks about the
that's
problem?
brilliant.
That's
He
fantastic.
loves to walk around, doesn't he?
Oh,
I
he
think
absolutely does.
I think that really helps him. He
You'll
gets
know
good ideas.
when it's really helping because he'll start doing things like this with his hands in the air, like actually drawing math on an imaginary blackboard. That's how you know he's really coming up with a good idea. Again, one of those things that if you're on site ever, you get to see in person and is really kind of a unique. It's a unique experience, and our faithful researcher Harshad is actually providing us with some real time information on this. He actually did say ahead of time he'd be setting up his camera to make it interesting for spectators, and in case he watches this broadcast later on, yes, absolutely, thank you for doing so. You have done a fantastic job of that, and we appreciate it.
So he's left the room.
Yeah, he has.
I can't see his computer is on that little desk, is it? It's hard to tell.
It could be on that little desk right next to the notebook and pencil he's got there. That would make sense.
Right, he's back. Yeah, this is very interesting, just watching them in their own home environment. This is their natural state.
It is. One other question we actually had come in a few minutes ago, but we were kind of deep in a good discussion there. Does language come into play at all with these type of problems, or is it so math-based that it doesn't matter? I'm not sure if that's referring to language that the competitors speak in terms of their native tongues, or if we're talking about the programming language. Because those two things are two different questions, and I guess I would answer them differently. Although I am seeing that there were some competitors mentioning Python being very slow.
Yeah.
I'll attempt to give a stab at this first, then if you want to add in.
Yeah, go on.
So in general, of course, C++ is by far going to be your fastest executing language. You're going to get more computation per CPU cycles than you're going to get in any other language because there's no overhead from the just-in-time compilation or any of the interpretation going on. C++ is going to be your next best with some interpretation going on. Java is going to be a little bit slower than that, and Python, unfortunately, is going to be the slowest of them all usually. Simply because the amount of interpretation in the runtime overhead, you're going to get the most CPU cycles worth of your money when you're using C++, and that's in fact why you see most algorithm and a majority of marathon competitors do use C++, with a handful that use Java. If you disagree with any of that, feel free to add in, or if you have other thoughts, I'm certainly interested to hear that.
Yeah, no, I agree. C++ is definitely one of the fastest language, and that's probably why a lot of the competitors choose to use it. But I know some competitors like Java. Like I personally like Java. I find it easier to code in. So sometimes speed is not everything. Sometimes you want to use the language just for its convenience. So Python is very easy to use, but it is quite slow for these competitions. So I don't know any high-ranking coders that use Python here.
No, probably not. Although I'll let you in on a little fun fact. Misov, on the algorithm side, when he is testing some of the problems, very frequently will write a solution in Python if runtime is not that important, because it's oftentimes faster to write the code in Python than any other language. And like you said, Java has an advantage over C++. You've got some of your typing and some of your memory management stuff that you don't have to worry about anymore. So there's definitely something to be said for that as well.
Yeah, that definitely helps, and it has some good libraries. Actually, Python has some great libraries if you're doing machine learning stuff.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, so the other type of competitions that we have at marathons are client-based matches where you want to you want to do some kind of data science or machine learning, and Python is often used in those matches.
Yeah, Python tends to be kind of the industry standard for a lot of data science stuff. There's so many utilities and platforms that are built upon it, and the ability to kind of have the interpreted language where you change things on the fly definitely has its advantages.
Yeah, so we're looking at the leaderboard now. So we have 5 submissions. Looks like Saliper is first with 99.9, followed by Nika, and then I would guess Psyho. But the order's a bit strange here. I don't know why he's fifth.
Yeah, I'm actually okay.
Looks like a bit of a bug, actually.
That is interesting. I'm not sure why that is the case, but yeah, that could just be a display bug or something not updating. I'm seeing the same thing though. While we have a second, I'll do one more. Oh, it looks like things just updated.
Oh, he's 0.84.
Yeah, Saiho is in fact fifth.
So it is fifth.
He's probably pretty early in his overall solution process.
So what do you think he's done there, Aaron? Or why has he only got 0.84? What's going on?
He has probably submitted what he calls his dummy solution, which is something that works just well enough that it returns a valid return value and has no thought to it whatsoever. That would be my guess. Even a random solution, I'm guessing, would be at least sort of competitive relative to the others. Again, having talked to Saiho in the past and know a little bit about kind of his strategy and his approach, he's probably at that phase where he's just doing just a solution that's just good enough to work to give him something to work on.
Yeah. And another thought I had, maybe he's testing a particular case. So maybe he's looking at X of a particular value and just returning an answer just for that particular value and doing nothing.
We're actually looking at his screen right now on the live stream for anybody at home that is
so that way, so maybe he's just got the one case and he got 0.84 and he can compare himself to the best solution out there, and that gives him an idea of how he's going. I'm just guessing.
Yeah, that is just a guess. It is interesting to see what happens. My guess, though, is that Saiho is not going to stay in fifth for very long. I'm sure within the hour he'll be making many other submissions, and they'll probably score much higher. That is, of course, just a guess on my part, though.
So when I talked to him many years ago, he told me his strategy is actually to write a lot of different methods. Just try different things, different ideas, and then see what works because if you don't do that, you don't know what will be good up front.
You don't really know what approach to commit to try to refine until you've
Exactly. And I think this is a good strategy that I've actually taken on board and try to replicate myself. Doesn't always work for me, but yeah. Because sometimes what happens is sometimes you write a simple algorithm, and then that simple algorithm can be used by a more complex algorithm as a subroutine. So it's always useful to have simple algorithms, and plus it helps you to do your testing.
So I can say I have the advantage here, I believe you do also, that I see some competitor screens, and I actually did see something on his screen that sort of gave me a little bit of a clue as to what he's doing.
Okay.
In the interest of not revealing anything too specific, I want to be careful how I say this. It looks like he is working on solving one specific part of the problem that in his mind might be important, and maybe is not fully filling the pizza pie full of toppings yet, and it's just kind of looking at certain parts of it or trying to do one certain thing. That would be my guess as to what's happening. So he's probably not placing as many toppings as other people yet, but I'm guessing he has his reasons for that because he does want to solve one specific issue that he's focusing on.
What I have noticed from Psycho's screen is he's actually copied the code from the tester and he's converted it to his language, so C++. So that's a useful strategy. That means you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just reuse existing code. I think there was previously a question about language.
Yes.
So we've answered the version about coding language, but we haven't talked about the person's natural language. So I think,
for myself, I speak English natively anyway, and all the problems are in English,
yeah,
so I've never had a problem
yeah,
in that regard. I don't know if others may feel differently. I'm guessing some folks probably do have a little bit of a learning curve and a little bit more overhead to translate and make sure that they really understand.
yeah. I mean, most people know some level of English, but obviously not everyone knows English very well. And I've seen some competitors use like a Google Translate kind of thing, where they translate the problem, and that helps them. But I guess that translation won't be perfect every time, and it might cause some issues there.
I think that the translation issues are more likely to come up in what I would call the story part of the problem, not necessarily the
Yeah,
implementation details. Once you get down to the sort of brass tacks of it, where you're talking about the very specific mathematical language, even in other languages, a lot of the terminology is very similar and has pretty precise meaning that's usually well understood. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's kind of what I've seen. I'm hoping certainly that's not a problem for anyone. What we're seeing on the stream now, by the way, we're seeing Cattle and T's output, and something similar to what I was saying before. It looks like he might be trying to solve just a part of the problem that he's interested in right now, and not the whole thing. I also did notice at a glance it looked like a lot of his toppings were overlapping pretty badly, so he's not got something that's working yet.
yeah. I think he's still developing his overlapping function, unless there's a problem in the actual tester where the overlapping function doesn't work. And I think that's actually possible, but let's hope that doesn't happen.
Now that you have actually said that one out loud and
Yeah.
jinxed yourself.
Oh no, don't listen to me.
Yeah.
Everything's gonna be fine.
So we did have one more question come up. Do competitors design their own visualizer? And I would say usually that's a no, although certainly they're given the source code to the visualizer that we provide, so they're free to update it. And
Yeah, they
additionally,
might change it a bit.
yeah, I think we saw somebody who had done some custom coloring on it to maybe make it easier to see whatever it is they were trying to test. Are you interested in talking at all about visualizer updates? That's another question we had come in. I don't know if it's
What does that mean? I'm trying to
that's
work
actually
out.
a good question. I'm not sure. So perhaps we skip that one for now. We're actually almost at the end of our time anyway.
Visualize updates. Does that mean where people just write their own code?
I want to talk about the visualizer updates that W. Late did on his visualizer. I see. I think we actually kind of already were
Oh,
getting at that.
right.
Changing
Yeah, so
stuff.
WLite did a lot of updates to the visualizer, which makes writing problems a lot easier. And it also makes the visualizer easier to use for the competitors, because he's introduced this whole mechanism for testing. So you could run multiple test sets, and that's really useful to get an idea of, all the different scores you get. And actually, we're looking at his screen now, and he's got this really cool spreadsheet where he puts the best scores for each case,
This is actually what I was talking
and
about
it's
earlier with
all
having spreadsheets.
done automatically. It's really neat.
Yeah, the visualizer typically will output some stuff at the end of its run, just saying what the score was and things like this. And I believe he's got something that sort of wraps around that, takes that output, and then dumps it into his sheet and does whatever it is he's doing with it. It's a great
Yeah,
tool.
it saves it into a file, and then he must read that file and dumps it. Yep.
Yeah.
The other thing he's done, he's added interactive problems can now be done with the new visualizer, but we haven't had any interactive problems for a while now, but hopefully soon, fingers crossed. So that feature is in there, so that's coming.
Yeah, that'll be fun to see.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
we are at the end of our hour now. I think unless there's any final comments, we'll get ready to send this back over to Nick at the main desk.
Yep. If there's no more other questions.
I think we're good. We'll send this back to the studio.
Okay, thank you everyone for watching.
And yeah, we'll be back tomorrow. What is that, 21, 22 hours from now, I believe we're going to be back?
So just after the competition finishes, we're going to do some interviews with Psycho and Black Math, I believe. Hopefully they're still awake and can tell us about their approach.
Yeah,
Looking
we'll
forward
certainly
to that.
see how they're looking by that point. No, that'll be fun.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. We look forward to talking to you tomorrow.
Thank you all. Thanks for watching.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Aaron and Dimitri, for that wonderful hour. I feel like you guys could have gone on for way more than an hour with all that information. Now, as I mentioned, this is a 24-hour competition, so they won't even be done until 10 p.m. tomorrow, top coder time. So thank you so much for joining us for this first half. We're going to have a second half of this, the marathon finals competition discussion tomorrow, and you can check out on TCO20.topcoder.com for our broadcast schedule of when that's going to take place. Coming up next, however, is the development competition. And when I say next, I mean tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning, we're going to cover the development competition as it is going to be running in parallel with the marathon match. We will have Tony and Will hosting tomorrow, and then we'll have Aaron and Dimitri back on later that day. So as for now, I will be signing off here in the Top Coders studio, and I hope to see you all tomorrow. Until then, good night.